So let's have a look at this first part. This first part is about Trump knowing that there was weapons there. It's in two parts, and the first part is communication between the police, right? It's recorded communication between the police where they are identifying the people who have weapons. So this sets the scene to say that there were weapons there. Step one.
There's an individual who's in a tree. He's going to be a white male, about 6 feet tall, 10 build, brown cowboy boots. He's got blue jeans and a blue jean jacket, and underneath the blue jean jacket, the complainant both saw stock with AR-15. He's going to be with a group of individuals, about five to eight other individuals. Two of the individuals in that group at the base of the tree, near the porta potties, were wearing green fatigues, green olive drab style fatigues, about 5'8", 5'9", skinny white males, brown cowboy boots. They had Glock-style pistols in their waistband. 8736 with the message that the subject weapon on his right hip. After that, he's in the tree.
Motor 1, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the tree south side of Constitution Avenue. Look for the Don't Tread on Me flag, American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
I got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15, copy at 14th and Independent.
So that last one, if you're listening to the audio, which was a bit hard to hear, 3 men walking down the street carrying AR-15s. So that was confirmation that weapons were there. But then the next part of it has to be linked back to Donald Trump to know if he knew they were there. Well, there was conversations around the size of the crowd, and Donald Trump wasn't happy with the size of the crowd because he's the most thin-skinned man on the face of the planet, and he needs to always have the biggest crowd possible. There were people outside the crowd, outside what they call the mags, which is the magnetic resonance imaging thing where people walk through, basically the metal detector. So when you hear them talking about shut down the mags, they're talking about the metal detectors, and they were on the other side of the mags because they had weapons, and Trump actively says, they didn't bring weapons for me, let them in, shut down the mags. So this is evidence that Donald Trump knew that there was weapons there on the 6th and that they were going to be going down towards the Capitol building.
In one text, you write, but the crowd looks good from this vantage point as long as we get the shot. He was effing furious. And the text messages also stress that President Trump kept mentioning the OTR and off-the-record movement. We're going to come back and ask you about that in a minute. But could you tell us, first of all, who it is in the text who was furious?
The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the Ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
And did you go to the rally in the presidential motorcade?
I was there, yes, in the motorcade.
And were you backstage with the president and other members of his staff and family?
I was.
And you told us, Ms. Hutchinson, about particular comments that you heard while you were in the tent area.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. One of the reasons, which I've previously stated, was because he wanted it to be full and for people to not feel excluded because they'd come far to watch him at the rally. And he felt the mags were at fault for not letting everybody in. But another leading reason, and likely the primary reason, is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons. What the Secret Service deemed as weapons and our weapons.
So in case that was unclear, it was she was saying, who's the witness for today, that Trump was angry because people with weapons weren't being let through the mags.
But when we were in the offstage announce tent, I was part of a conversation. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the president wanted to take the mags away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
So there you go. So Trump knew there was weapons there, confirmed by the police. Trump knew there was weapons there. Trump knew that the weapons weren't there to worry him. So all of that conversation around no one knowing there was weapons there was no evidence of weapons there, is all gone in an instant. George, you want to offer something?
Yeah. Like, this is fascinating in a sense. Like, I mean, I'm not too concerned with where, what sort of legal outcome comes of this committee and all that sort of thing. It's more of a show deal. But it's really interesting getting insight into into Trump's thinking on that day, because I reckon, obviously he wanted armed people there. That's sort of what that confirms.
Yeah.
And then the stuff in the with the vehicle, which do we have that testimony as well? Well, I guess we can play that.
Do you want to roll that now?
Yeah, I'll come back around to it.
All right. So this is a conversation around the vehicle. This is one of the things that people have been talking about. I don't think this is the worst thing, but it's an allegation that is secondhand. But as we say, I'm going to let it play through to the end, because at the very end, the congresswoman asks, or the senator anyway, asks if the person who was the source of the original information, who was in the room, although not telling the story, corrected anything, and the witness says no. So even though it's technically secondhand, the person who was firsthand didn't correct any of the information. So have a look. This is Donald Trump when he got off stage, wanting to go to the Capitol where the people, the insurrectionists, were marching. And this is, I guess we'll have to be fair and say, the allegations of what happened in the car.
Ms. Hutchinson, when you returned to the White House in the motorcade after the president's speech, where did you go?
When I returned to the White House, I walked upstairs towards the Chief of Staff's office, and I noticed Mr. Ornato lingering outside of the office. Once we had made eye contact, he quickly waved me to go into his office, which was just across the hall from mine. When I went in, he shut the door, and I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, just looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost. I looked at Tony, and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" I said, "No, Tony, I just got back. What happened?" Tony proceeded to tell me that...
For clarity, the Beast is what they call the armored limo. So did you hear what happened in the armored limo?
When the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, "We're not, you don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing," the president had a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
And was Mr. Engel in the room as Mr. Ornato told you this story?
He was.
Did Mr. Engel correct or disagree with any part of the story from Mr. Ornato?
Mr. Engel did not correct or disagree with any part of the story.
Did Mr. Engel or Mr. Ornato ever after that tell you that what Mr. Ornato had just said was untrue?
Neither Mr. Ornato nor Mr. Engel told me ever that it was untrue.
There you go, George. Floor is yours, sir.
Yeah, I this is the one I'm interested in, mainly because it's the most, sort of cartoonish. I love Trump
Salacious.
being cartoonish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not like the worst one, but it's the more sort of indicative of me just sort of trying to get a bead on his thinking that day, because I'm sure Trump didn't even really know how he was going to proceed with it. Obviously, it was sort of established that he wanted his armed friends at Capitol Hill, and then wanted to go there. And I guess, in the sort of most planned out scenario of that, to go to Capitol Hill to sort of meet his people and sort of assume the presidency in a way, or a sort of like the sort of government within a government, or a coup, or whatever you want to call it, which would have failed. Possibly would have been a lot bloodier, because he would have been at the center of it. Would have been probably funnier, or because Trump would have been at the center of it. Like, just imagine it's Trump in Pelosi's office on the phone with his boots up on the desk.
Yeah.
But yeah.
As I said,
Sorry.
there are Secret Service agents who have said that they'll testify that didn't happen. And I think I saw that on CNN as a commentary. But the point that was made after that is everyone who is suggesting it didn't happen, none of them are currently under oath and before the Senate. Once they become under oath, once they get under oath, we'll see if their story is the same or not. But that, as I said, that was technically secondhand, but the person who gave the first-hand account was in the room and didn't correct anything. So it's pretty much first-hand.
Yeah, and with the Secret Service, I mean, there's a sort of contradiction in when democracies have intelligence services, right? Because intelligence services are professional liars and professional sort of, mouth zip sort of people. Of course, they're going to sort of, they're not going to admit that a president, that they lost control of a situation, or whatever it is. I know, maybe shit will come out eventually, but yeah.
One of the reasons that this witness has been seen to be so significant is she was working in the West Wing. They showed a map of the hallway during this, and her office was perhaps less than 10 meters from the Oval Office. So she's there and she's hearing these conversations. And as you heard the first one, she was backstage when the conversation was had about the gun. So this is not, someone getting a tip or someone understanding something. This is someone who was actually literally there. And that's why some are saying that this is so devastating. I want to play you a clip. I was a bit confused as to why they played this clip, other than perhaps they just want to show how ridiculous Trump's inner circle was. It didn't necessarily add to today's conversation from the witness, but it was General Michael Flynn. And he gets asked the most simple layup softball questions, and he can't answer them. So this is a little bit set aside from perhaps the conversation around today's witness. It's part of today's testimony. I just wanted to play it because you talk about cartoonish, George. This is ridiculous. He basically gets asked, was it an appropriate action? Was that violence appropriate? And he just would not answer it. Would not answer it at all. Let's have a look at General Michael Flynn. General Michael Flynn, goodness gracious me, how far people can fall.
So General Flynn has appeared before this committee, and when he appeared before our committee, he took the fifth. Let's briefly view a clip of General Mike Flynn taking the Fifth Amendment. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
It's a lay down Mazia.
Yes.
Was the violence justified? Those police officers who died, and was it justified?
All right, we're back. Congressman Cheney, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
Is can I get clarification? Is that a moral question, or are you asking a legal question?
I'm asking both.
I said the Fifth.
Do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified morally?
Take the Fifth.
You believe the violence on January 6th was justified legally?
Fifth.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The Fifth.
So the last question, if it wasn't clear for those especially listening, he was asked, do you believe in a peaceful transition of power in America? And he pleaded the fifth to it. And just so you know, I've got it up here on Wikipedia. The Fifth Amendment, I was going to do it basically, but I thought maybe I'll read it and say exactly what it is. But it's basically the right not to answer a question in case you self-incriminate yourself. It's to stop you from incriminating yourself against activity. So when people plead the Fifth, it doesn't always mean they're guilty of a crime, but obviously it's saying I'm not going to answer this in case my answer leads to a criminal conviction, an indictment, whatever the correct terminology is. So he chose to plead the Fifth even to the question, the theoretical question of does he believe in a peaceful transition of power in government?
Yeah, I mean, fair enough when you're getting sort of that you're in this weird sort of spot where you're getting investigated by your political enemies. Like the whole sort of congressional committee model is it seems sort of bizarre to me, right? That Miss Cheney sort of runs this court. Like, surely that's the smartest thing for him to do, especially with I was confused about the question. What does she mean? Violence on the January 6th? Does she mean like the rioters?
Yeah, she was saying was the people entering the building, smashing windows, killing people. Was that appropriate?
Because if he really wanted to fuck around with it, he could twist that, right? Because there was when she said the violence justified it, I suddenly thought of like that video of the Capitol police guy shooting that lady in the head, that sort of thing. Anyway,
One more clip. Yeah, one more clip. And this last clip is how they wrapped up. And I don't think Ms. Cheney, she's not running it. I think she's the second in charge of this thing. But she had the question. She had the floor today.
Well, she certainly has a lot of power over this committee, including having sort of blocking people from testifying in this committee that are friends of her family, but are basically pro-Trump lawyers who were involved in all this. So it's certainly not some immaculate legal body, right?
Yeah, and no one should think that she is all of a sudden the second savior because she happens to be asking the questions in this. She is basically voted for and along with Trump for his whole presidential. They've had a disagreement at the end, and she disagrees with this end of his tenure. But as far as it comes to politics and policy, they're on the same page. So. Yeah, but I mean, I guess I wonder if one of the reasons she's doing a lot of the questioning for this is she is a Republican, and the Republican Party actively didn't want anybody to be on this panel because they wanted it to be able to say this is not bipartisan. So what they've had to do is say that she is a rhino, and she's got it into Trump, so she's not a real Republican. But I wonder if one of the reasons she's asking the questions is because she's a Republican, it therefore can't really be said. It can't be said, but it's harder to say that this is just a vendetta from one side against the other because she's in the Republican side, perhaps. They wrapped up this conversation. One of the accusations that's been made during this is witness tampering, and so they wrapped up the conversation today by Ms. Cheney talking about what had happened to some previous witnesses and what previous witnesses had reported happening to them, hearing from people in and around Team Trump. And if you listen to this and you've watched The Sopranos, just think how The Sopranos used to stand over people and say, you know, this will be good for you, won't it? If it's good for you, it'll be good for us. If it's good for us, you'll be okay. Just have a think about the way that the mafia kind of heavy-handedly stands over people with some of this witness testimony.
While our committee has seen many witnesses, including many Republicans, testify fully and forthrightly, this has not been true of every witness. And we have received evidence of one particular practice that raises significant concern. Our committee commonly asks witnesses connected to Mr. Trump's administration or campaign whether they've been contacted by any of their former colleagues or anyone else who attempted to influence or impact their testimony. Without identifying any of the individuals involved, let me show you a couple of samples of answers we received to this question. First, here is how one witness described phone calls from people interested in that witness's testimony. Quote, "What they said to me is as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world. And they have reminded me a couple of times that Trump does read transcripts, and just keep that in mind as I proceed through my interviews with the committee." Here's another sample in a different context. This is a call received by one of our witnesses. Quote, "A person let me know you have your deposition tomorrow. He wants me to let you know he's thinking about you. He knows you're loyal and you're going to do the right thing when you go in for your deposition." I think most Americans know that attempting to influence witnesses to testify untruthfully presents very serious concerns. We will be discussing these issues as a committee, carefully considering our next steps. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
And that's it. So, I mean, that could just be lifted from a Sopranos script, you know, the way that that was worded.